I'm not a huge believer in introducing people that you all know, so Bill and Willie Geist. I'm assuming you all know which is which. Fellas, this is a funny book. You might expect that from these two men if you know their TV work. It is also filled with a lot of heart and a lot of amazing honesty. Bill, you used to be a reporter here in town, and when you were...
Actually, they didn't let me downtown.
Well, one of the many great mistakes the Chicago Tribune has made.
I'm proud
It's
to be
already
on that
uncomfortable
list.
Oh,
in here.
it's a very, very, very long list, Bill. I want to read something. I'm going to do some reading from the book because I really like the way these two guys write. Bill writing to Willie. Until you were 12, I'd been a newspaper reporter, saying his parents had owned a paper in downstate Illinois. But I guided you away from newspapers, not because they were becoming extinct yet, but because I'd had some bad experiences, like being trapped for 8 years in the basement office out by the airport of the suburban section of the Chicago Tribune local paper, writing about sewer board referenda. Even when I wrote a popular column, and I remember it, didn't you remember Bill's column in the Trib? That's really shameful. You may not even remember subscribing to the Tribune, but that's another story completely. He just couldn't move up from the suburbs. Here's one reason. The legendary columnist Mike Royko liked my column so much that he put his hands around my neck at a holiday party saying, "You young punks are trying to steal my job." And Bill was flattered by that.
I was very flattered that he had any idea who I was.
Willie, do you have any memory of your dad as a reporter for the Tribune? Or you were only 5 when you moved, but...
Yes, so I was born in Evanston Hospital. Dr. Lapata, any Dr. Lapata babies in here? Really? What's that? Is he really?
Really?
It's your partner. Tell him I said hi. It's been 39 years, but tell him I said hi.
How the hell couldn't he have come here? Why didn't he come here?
I look a little different now.
We'll move on.
But yeah, I was born at Evanston Hospital, 1975, and my dad was writing for the Suburban Trib. And we moved when I was 5 years old. The New York Times came calling. He can tell you more about that story. The Chicago Tribune, the downtown paper, did not come calling, but the New York Times did. So we moved to New Jersey, and I grew up around New York City. My dad likes to say, although he did move for a job, he was also providing a service, because raising a child in Chicago as a Cubs fan under Illinois state law is child abuse. So he said, I wanted to move you to a place, the Yankees had just won a couple World Series, at least you'd have a fighting chance if we moved to New York.
I tried to tell Willie that winning and losing wasn't important when we'd go to Wrigley Field. And indeed, he'd eat everything in the place and then fall asleep about the 6th inning, which is a good policy for any Cubs fan. I think you've probably heard all these lines, but it's
How
like,
many of you are, but still,
Oh, yeah.
watch this. How many of you are still loyal Cubs fans?
now why?
It is such a wise move that
But
you
why?
guys...
Why?
that you
Why?
guys-
I'm still a Cubs fan too, but I don't know why.
But it's funny, for someone who moved from 5, at the age of 5 from here, I sure had a lot of allegiance. My parents met at the University of Illinois. My dad grew up in Champaign.
My second senior year.
Yes. He always says, it's good I flunked all those classes. I never would have met your mother my 5th year.
You wouldn't even be here.
But I used to, even though I had moved, I had the Chief Illini Weck wallpaper in my bedroom in New Jersey.
New Jersey, yeah.
Which my friends from New Jersey had no idea who Chief Illini Weck was.
These two never had the infamous talk about sex. There's a great deal, to my mind, of sex in this book, as when Willie writes, going to middle school, I was thrust into a 6th grade class version of Eyes Wide Shut. Suddenly, there were parties every weekend in the big houses where people were spinning bottles and disappearing into the closet in 7-minute increments. When you're 11 or 12 years old and you disappear into that closet, you're really making it up as you go along. I know this book was seeded, the idea of it came from your mutual agent. Did you initially, it seems like something that you might have said, no.
I think we did say no. A lot of people had said, just because we're both in the communications business together, they said, you ought to do something together, but no one quite knew what it was. And our agent, Tom Connor, my dad's longtime agent, had the idea. And we still kind of thought, I don't know, it sounds like a hassle, quite frankly. And then a couple of
Too
years,
much work.
a couple of years ago, as many of you know, my dad went on CBS Sunday Morning and announced that he has Parkinson's disease. And when
It
he
was
went,
just to get attention. It was
Wait, you
the
don't
same,
have
same
Parkinson's?
week Anderson Cooper came out.
Well, about that moment, Willie writes that when he did announce that Sunday, July 1st, 2012, that it was your proudest moment as a son. Elaborate on that a little for me.
well, I was proud of him because I knew how difficult it was. My dad's had Parkinson's for 22 years, if you can believe it. And for the first 10 of those years, he didn't tell me or my sister. There were no outward signs. We really wouldn't have known. We thought he was slowing down a little bit and was probably too young to be slowing down in hindsight. But we have family here who can relate. My dad says when you grow up in 1950s Champaign, Illinois, there's not a lot of hugging and touchy-feeliness and telling people your problems.
There are
and
no psychiatrists
Yes.
in Champaign.
pouring out your heart.
They keep opening up like hamburger stands and closing and running away.
But it was an agonizing process for my dad. And, my sister and I for years had been saying, just tell people. People know at this point. Your viewers know. Our family, friends who you haven't officially told, they all know. And so I knew how hard it was for him to do. And we actually were sitting in our living room together when it was live that Sunday morning, my wife and my mom and my dad. And we watched it together, and I was just incredibly proud. And there were a lot of tears, suffice it to say, in that room.
Wow.
Bill, you are, and you admitted in the book, a very private man.
Yeah.
How does a very private man deal with that very public role of being on television? Even though you're telling stories on television, it makes you a public figure.
Well, you can appreciate this, Rick. As a newspaper reporter, you're with the person you're interviewing, and so I don't have to face. This is the biggest audience I've faced in years.
Be nice, everybody.
But it's very much just talking to a camera and just over the years, you try to forget about the camera being there. And people are better now. They used to be very stiff and wouldn't answer questions and stuff. But now everybody with all the video things
No
going
question.
on, everybody has a video camera, so they're kind of accustomed to it.
You also come from a vastly different parenting time. Here is just another bit of, and I'm reading so much of this because the writing is very, very good and compelling. Let's be honest, Dad, sometimes the job of parenting is too big for any two people. This is you writing, Willie. Sometimes you have to call in for backup. We call it third-party discipline. Anybody in a uniform will do. Police officers, firemen, bus drivers, airplane pilots, park rangers, lifeguards, dental hygienists, gas station attendants, movie ticket takers, chefs, pharmacists, and anyone wearing a hard hat will do. Bill, you weren't particularly, your father was
Right.
not at all an emotionally outward,
I wouldn't
sensitive.
say so, would you? I've got a couple of my cousins.
And they're both going, no,
sisters
he
who-
wasn't, he was
No,
not.
he wasn't. I don't know if he liked photography, but he took it up so he could go down the basement and close the door. And if you opened the door, you'd ruin everything. But he had the radio on in there. No one really knows what went on there. But he was a high school teacher, and he'd come home at night, and I think he'd had enough of kids.
You mentioned the third-party discipline. My wife, we use anybody we can. We'll be sitting in a diner in New York City, and we have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and our 4-year-old boy, George, who's great, but he acts up sometimes. He'll be throwing things around the restaurant, and my wife will just grab him. And, they have that little, at the diner, the window, and the order comes up, and we'll say, "The chef is watching." And he'll turn around, and the chef's in the window. And then our other big move is we go in our neighborhood. My son worships the New York Police Department, loves cops and firefighters. And so there's this restaurant we go to all the time, and halfway down the block from the restaurant is the 20th Precinct. We go in there a lot, and the guys are so cool, and they give him badges that he can put on his jacket, and they let him go back and see all the equipment. And so we go in a lot, and once in a while, I'd say once out of every 20 times, we take him in there,